The music hall was buzzing with quiet excitement, the kind of energy that fills a place when everyone knows something important is about to happen. Warm lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the polished wooden floor, and the rows of chairs were almost full, packed with parents, friends, and music enthusiasts who had come to see the youth choir perform. Behind the scenes, the walls were lined with instruments and music stands, each holding sheets filled with notes that seemed to wait silently for the performers to bring them to life. In the middle of it all stood a young girl, small in stature but carrying a presence that belied her age. She clutched her music sheet in her hands, glancing nervously at the others around her. Her heart raced, not just from the nerves, but from the thrill of being part of something bigger than herself. She had spent months practicing for this day, learning every note, every pause, every expression, and yet, standing here now, she felt the familiar flutter of doubt, wondering if she could really shine in front of such a large crowd. The famous singer, known for his powerful voice and commanding presence, was rehearsing at the front of the hall. His reputation preceded him. Everyone knew he had a sharp eye for talent but also a sharp tongue for mistakes. He moved with confidence, stopping occasionally to point out small errors or to adjust the choir's timing. His voice echoed through the hall as he instructed the young singers. And there was no denying the authority in his tone. It was clear that he expected perfection, and anyone who fell short would feel his disappointment. Many of the children in the choir looked up to him with admiration, hoping to learn from his experience, but there was also a subtle fear, a hesitation to make mistakes under his watchful gaze. Among the choir members, the young girl felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had always loved singing, losing herself in the music, but today felt different. She could sense something in the air, a tension that made her pulse faster. As the singer's eyes scanned the group, she felt them pause on her for a moment longer than usual. There was a sharpness in his gaze, almost as if he were looking for someone to challenge, to test. She wasn't sure what he was thinking, but she could tell that her next moments on stage would be important, that they might define how others saw her, and maybe even how she saw herself. The hall itself seemed alive, as if it were aware of the drama unfolding. The chandeliers reflected tiny sparks of light across the walls, and the polished floor seemed to carry the whispers of all the performances that had come before. In the back, parents leaned forward in their seats, trying to catch a glimpse of every child, while cameras quietly recorded the event. Each child in the choir felt the weight of the audience's attention, and the young girl could feel it pressing gently but insistently on her shoulders. It was a strange feeling, part fear, part excitement, a sensation that made her hands tremble slightly as she held her music sheet. Despite the nerves, she remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the early mornings when she woke up before anyone else to sing, the late nights when she stayed up perfecting her high notes, and the moments in front of the mirror, imagining herself performing with confidence. All of that preparation seemed to gather inside her now, a quiet strength beneath the nervous energy. She took a deep breath, feeling her lungs fill with the kind of courage that only comes from being ready. As the choir began to warm up, voices blending together in harmonies that filled the room, the young girl focused on the music, trying to tune out everything else, but her focus was interrupted when the famous singer approached, his sharp eyes scanning the group until they landed on her. He spoke in a voice that carried easily across the hall, slightly teasing, slightly challenging, and she understood immediately that she was about to be tested. The other children glanced at her, sensing what was about to happen, and a hush fell over the group, as if the air itself was holding its breath. In that moment, the young girl realized that this was more than just another rehearsal, more than just another performance. It was a moment where she could either shrink back or stand tall, where the outcome didn't just depend on her voice, but on her courage, her belief in herself, and her ability to rise above anyone trying to intimidate her. She straightened her shoulders, clutched her music sheet a little tighter, and reminded herself that she had a voice worth hearing, that she had practiced, prepared, and dreamed of this very moment. And so, the stage was set, the audience waiting, the hall filled with anticipation, and the young girl, small but determined, ready to face whatever challenge came her way, prepared to step into the spotlight, not knowing yet that her performance would leave everyone, even the famous singer, completely stunned. The atmosphere in the music hall had changed subtly, the hum of the warming-up choir giving way to a sharper tension. Everyone could feel that something different was about to happen. The famous singer's eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the group of children until they landed on the young black girl. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her heartbeat quicken, and then, with a sudden gesture, he singled her out. The words he spoke were simple but carried weight. He wanted her to perform a solo. Everyone froze for a moment, the choir, the audience, even the girl herself, caught in the suspense. It wasn't unusual for children to sing solos during practice, but there was something about the singer's tone that made her sense this would be different. His smirk and the playful glint in his eyes didn't carry warmth, they carried a challenge, an almost daring taunt, as if he were saying, "Let's see what you're really made of." The young girl felt a flicker of fear, her palms starting to sweat as she held her music sheet a little tighter. She had always loved singing in front of others, but the weight of his presence made this feel less like an opportunity and more like a test, a moment where failure might be on display for everyone to see. The other children in the choir shifted uneasily, some whispering to one another, their curiosity mixing with concern. They had seen the singer do this before, picking someone to challenge, pushing them into the spotlight, hoping they would stumble, hoping the audience would laugh or gasp at their mistakes, and yet, there was also a strange sense of anticipation. As if everyone secretly wanted to see a child rise above his expectations, to take his mockery and turn it into something incredible. The young girl's mind raced, her stomach twisting into knots, but alongside the fear, a spark of determination began to grow. She remembered the months of practice, the notes she had sung until her voice cracked, the high notes she had conquered one by one in front of her mirror, the encouragement of her family telling her she had a gift. She realized that this was her moment, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to herself that she could sing, she could shine, she could take a challenge meant to belittle her and transform it into triumph. As she stepped forward, the polished wooden floor cooled beneath her shoes, the audience and choir members seemed to fade into the background, the lights above felt warmer now, not harsh, and her music sheet in her hand seemed lighter. Her voice, though small at first, started to emerge from her chest with confidence. The singer, observing closely, leaned back slightly, perhaps expecting hesitation, perhaps waiting for a slip, but she did not falter. Her first note wavered, but only for a brief second, then she steadied it, letting it flow naturally. It was as if the music itself was embracing her, giving her strength. Each subsequent note grew bolder, more confident. The room seemed to listen, every breath she took, every word she sang, holding the audience in rapt attention. Even the famous singer, so used to controlling the energy of the stage, could feel the shift, something unexpected rising from the young girl, a presence and talent that he hadn't anticipated. The challenge, meant to mock and intimidate, was turning into something extraordinary. The girl, once nervous and uncertain, began to realize the power she held. The music was hers, the moment hers, and the attempt to ridicule her only gave her more reason to shine. She didn't see the performance as a battle, she simply sang from her heart, each note a quiet declaration that she belonged on that stage, that her talent could not be dismissed. The tension in the room had transformed into admiration, the kind that starts as disbelief and slowly grows into respect. Parents and audience members leaned forward, some holding their breath, sensing the unfolding story. The other choir members watched with wide eyes, inspired by her courage, and perhaps imagining their own potential in her example. Even the famous singer, usually unshakable, felt a flicker of something new, an acknowledgement that this was more than a solo, it was a statement. A moment where expectations collided with undeniable skill. And in that moment, standing under the soft glow of the stage lights, the young girl realized that the challenge had changed her, had shifted the balance of power in her favor, not because she wanted to humiliate anyone, but because she had found her voice, and in finding it, she had discovered that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to step forward and sing anyway. The young girl stepped fully into the spotlight now, her small frame framed by the warm glow of the stage lights. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest, a rapid rhythm that seemed to echo through the music hall. As the first notes left her lips, they were hesitant, slightly wavering, as if the music itself was testing her. She could feel the famous singer's gaze upon her, sharp and expectant, and it made her nerves coil tighter. Her hands shook just enough to make the music sheet tremble, and for a fleeting second, she questioned whether she could meet the challenge. The choir behind her seemed to fade into a blur, their harmonies soft and distant compared to the intense focus she placed on her own voice. She inhaled deeply, trying to calm the jittering in her stomach. but every inhale felt heavy, weighted with anticipation, and she could sense the audience leaning in, waiting for the moment to either fall into chaos or soar into brilliance. The famous singer, standing just a few feet away, leaned slightly forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and subtle amusement, as though he was ready to enjoy her faltering, ready to relish the crack in her confidence. Her first few notes were tentative, wavering between hesitation and control, the pitch trembled ever so slightly, and she cursed inwardly, feeling every second stretch painfully. This was the moment she had prepared for, yet it felt different when the spotlight was real and the gaze of a powerful, critical figure bore down on her. She could hear a faint whisper of murmurs from the audience, some anxious, some doubtful, all of it mingling into a pressure that threatened to drown her. But then, something inside her shifted. Almost imperceptibly, she remembered the countless times she had practiced alone in her room, singing to no one but the walls, hitting high notes she had been told were impossible. She remembered the encouragement of her family, the smiles and pride that had fueled her determination. She remembered every note she had conquered, every small victory that had led to this stage. She realized that fear was temporary, but the chance to prove herself, to truly express her talent, might never come again. She steadied her breath, letting it flow naturally. Her eyes flicked briefly to the audience, then back to her music sheet, and finally she let herself listen to the music within her, not the fear around her. The trembling in her voice began to settle, replaced by a quiet strength, as if the notes themselves were guiding her. She could feel her body relax slightly, her hands no longer gripping the music sheet so tightly, and the first hesitant notes started to transform into flowing melodies, smoother and more confident than before. Yet, the struggle was not over. Each high note, each sudden shift in pitch demanded her full attention. Her voice occasionally wavered, teetering on the edge of faltering, and the famous singer's smirk never left his face. He leaned in as if waiting for that moment when the young girl might break, but she refused to let it happen. She pushed herself to focus not on his presence, but on the music itself, on the story she wanted to tell with every tone, every pause, every rise and fall of her voice. The audience, sensing the tension, began to lean forward, holding their breath. Their eyes were fixed on the young girl, who now seemed to be battling not just the notes, but the invisible weight of expectation, humiliation, and fear. Her struggle became palpable, a living moment that everyone in the hall could feel. It was raw, it was human, and it was beautiful. Each note carried not just melody, but courage, determination, and the unspoken truth that sometimes the hardest part of greatness is simply beginning. Even in that struggle, something remarkable was happening. The wavering voice was starting to find its strength, small victories in pitch and tone emerging like sparks in the dark. Each note sung correctly was a silent triumph, each sustained note a quiet declaration that she would not be defeated, that the challenge, meant to mock her, could not define her. And in that moment of struggle, the young girl began to discover the most important truth. Sometimes, it is the fight itself, the struggle against fear, that makes victory possible. Something shifted in the young girl, almost imperceptibly at first, as if the music itself had whispered a secret into her ear. The initial fear that had made her voice waver melted slowly, replaced by a quiet, simmering determination. She realized that this was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above fear. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and allowed her breath to deepen, feeling the vibration in her chest, the power that came not from force, but from focus. From that moment, every note she sang began to carry more than sound. It carried confidence, a courage that radiated from deep inside her. The hall seemed to change with her. The lights above felt warmer, the audience's presence less intimidating and more like witnesses to something extraordinary. Even the famous singer, who had been poised to mock, leaned back slightly, his expression shifting as he began to notice the change in her. The girl's voice, once hesitant, now flowed freely, rising and falling with grace, hitting the high notes that had seemed impossible moments ago. She could feel the music wrapping around her, guiding her, encouraging her, as if the song itself had chosen her to tell its story. With each note, her confidence grew, building layer upon layer. She stopped thinking about what could go wrong, about the smirk of the singer or the critical eyes of the audience. Instead, she focused only on the sound she wanted to create, the emotion she wanted to convey. The trembling in her hands vanished, her fingers loosening around the music sheet, and her body swayed gently with the rhythm, fully in harmony with her voice. It was in this moment that the true magic happened. The solo that had begun as a test, a trap meant to humiliate, transformed into a performance of breathtaking skill. Her voice reached notes even she had only dared to dream of, clear, pure, and powerful. The famous singer's smirk faded completely, replaced by surprise and an unspoken acknowledgement. The room seemed to hold its breath. The audience caught in a delicate balance between disbelief and awe. Everyone could feel it. This was not just a good performance, it was a moment of triumph born from courage. The young girl herself felt a surge of exhilaration, a thrill that came from finally stepping beyond her fear. She realized that the challenge, the doubt, even the mockery, had all been catalysts for this transformation. Each note she sang now carried not only melody, but pride, strength, and self-assurance. She began to experiment subtly with her voice, pushing the limits of her range, daring to reach higher and hold longer. And with each attempt, she felt unstoppable. The hall seemed to vibrate with her determination, every listener leaning closer, held captive by the unfolding miracle. Even the choir behind her, who had been silent witnesses, felt the shift, their own eyes widening in surprise, mouths slightly open, as they saw what could happen when raw talent met unwavering focus. The young girl was no longer a nervous child, she had become a performer, a force of nature, commanding attention without arrogance. Her transformation was visible in every movement, every note, every breath. And the energy of the hall responded, rising with her, creating an almost tangible sense of magic. And the famous singer, the one who had tried to test her, could no longer mask his astonishment. His eyes, once sharp with judgment, softened, and for the first time in the rehearsal, he was silent, simply listening, witnessing a moment he hadn't expected. It was clear to him, as it was to everyone in the room, that this young girl had not only survived the challenge, she had conquered it, turning fear into beauty, doubt into melody, and mockery into triumph. By the time she reached the final high notes, the young girl felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. Her body relaxed, her smile bright, and her voice soared with clarity and emotion. The struggle of the earlier moments had been transformed into exhilaration, and she knew, deep inside, that this was the moment she would carry with her forever. The challenge had become her triumph, and in that transformation, she discovered the power of believing in herself. The young girl's voice now filled the hall with a power that seemed to surprise even herself. Each note she sang was stronger, purer, reaching higher than anyone had anticipated. The famous singer, who had hoped to humiliate her, could barely conceal the astonishment in his eyes. His confidence, which had filled the room moments ago, now wavered as he realized that the child before him was not just meeting the challenge, she was surpassing it. The audience was silent at first, unsure if they were allowed to react. The tension in the room was almost tangible, like holding your breath underwater, waiting for something impossible to happen. And then, as her voice climbed effortlessly into notes that had seemed unreachable, whispers of awe began to ripple through the crowd. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and a few gasps escaped in astonishment. They had all expected a small faltering, a moment of hesitation, but instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. Every note she sang seemed to defy gravity, stretching higher and higher, flowing freely and confidently. Each rise and pitch was a triumph, a bold statement that no one could diminish her talent. The famous singer's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on her, as if trying to understand how a child could accomplish something so astonishing. The balance of power on stage had shifted, and it was clear that she had taken control. The choir members behind her began to watch in awe, their own nerves replaced by admiration. Some of them even whispered to each other, their voices hushed but full of excitement. "She's amazing," one said quietly, unable to contain the wonder in her tone. The young girl, sensing the attention of both her peers and the audience, felt a surge of energy, but it was different now, calm, controlled, not fear, not doubt, but pure confidence. She had stepped fully into her own power, and it radiated from her, wrapping the room in its intensity. As she continued, she added subtle flourishes to her performance, small improvisations that showed not just technical skill, but artistry. The notes she hit, high and clear, were once considered unreachable, yet here they were, filling the hall with brilliance. Even the famous singer, who had spent his life mastering vocal control, could not reach the heights she now achieved, the realization hit the room in waves. This was not just talent, this was extraordinary mastery born from courage, focus, and determination. The audience, who had been waiting for a stumble, was now on the edge of their seats, completely captivated. Some whispered encouragement, some clapped softly mid-song, unable to contain themselves, but the young girl remained focused, letting the music guide her, letting the notes flow naturally from her lungs. She no longer noticed fear, mockery, or doubt. She was fully present in the music, letting her voice tell the story that had begun with hesitation and struggle just moments before. Even the famous singer could no longer interrupt the magic. His attempts to regain control of the stage were irrelevant. His presence, once intimidating, now seemed to fade into the background as she dominated the room with her talent. Every note became a statement, a declaration that she belonged on that stage, that no one could belittle her brilliance, and that the expectations set before her were meant to be exceeded. And then, the final note came, sustained and soaring, ringing with clarity and emotion. The hall erupted in applause, cheers, and whistles, an overwhelming wave of admiration that washed over her. The young girl, still standing tall, smiled for the first time without fear, her heart racing not with anxiety, but with pride and exhilaration. She had done more than meet the challenge. She had transformed it into a moment that no one would ever forget. In that moment, she realized that the mockery, the doubt, and even the famous singer's challenge had been catalysts for her greatness. Each note she sang had defied expectations, not just for the audience, but for herself. She had discovered the power of courage, preparation, and self-belief, and in doing so, she had created a moment of pure magic, unforgettable and inspiring, leaving everyone in the hall, including the singer, forever changed. The applause was still echoing through the music hall when the famous singer finally spoke, but his voice was different now, quieter, less certain than before. He had expected a performance that faltered, a moment that would make the girl shrink under the weight of expectation, but what he had witnessed was nothing short of extraordinary. His eyes, which had once scanned the room with sharp judgment, were now wide with astonishment, a mixture of surprise and something he had rarely felt before. Admiration. For a brief moment, the singer was speechless, the kind of silence that only comes when reality exceeds imagination. He had built his career on precision, control, and the knowledge that mistakes would expose weakness, but here was a child who seemed to effortlessly surpass his expectations, her voice reaching notes that even he struggled to hold. Her tone was pure, her timing perfect, and the confidence she displayed was undeniable. Each note seemed to challenge him, as if saying, "I am here. I belong. You cannot diminish me." He took a step forward, unconsciously, as if drawn toward the music, trying to understand how such a small voice could carry so much power. The subtle smile that had once held mockery vanished completely, replaced by a serious, almost reverent expression. He watched as her eyes shone with focus, her posture tall and proud, her every gesture filled with purpose. The girl had not only met the challenge, she had exceeded it, turning a moment meant for humiliation into a display of brilliance. The audience had begun to notice the change in him, some whispering to each other. Even he looked surprised. He didn't expect this. The realization spread that the singer, a figure known for his authority and critical eye, was no longer the dominant presence on stage. That power had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, to the young girl, whose voice had not only captivated everyone else but had also shaken him to his core. He cleared his throat, a soft sound, almost hesitant, and took a step back, finally allowing the music and the applause to take center stage. For the first time, he experienced the rare feeling of being humbled, not in anger or defeat, but in awe. The child before him had done what many could not. She had transformed fear into artistry, struggle into triumph, and doubt into undeniable brilliance. The singer's mind raced as he tried to process the performance, replaying the moments in his head, the high notes she had hit, the perfect control, the expression she had poured into every phrase. It was as if he had been holding a mirror up to himself and seen, reflected back, the pure essence of talent and courage, something that could not be measured by experience or reputation alone. He found himself clapping, softly at first, then louder as the audience continued their own ovation. His expression softened, a quiet smile appearing on his lips. He knew that this young girl had just taught him a lesson that no amount of training or accolades could ever provide, that real talent was not just about hitting notes or commanding a stage. It was about heart, courage, and the ability to rise when the world expects you to fall. As the cheers and applause continued, he finally stepped forward, gesturing toward her in acknowledgement, not as a critic, not as a judge, but as someone who had witnessed greatness. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that moment, there was understanding, respect, and perhaps a little bit of awe. The girl, still standing proud, smiled back, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence, knowing that she had earned not only the audience's admiration but the respect of someone who had once seemed untouchable. The famous singer, for all his fame and experience, had been reminded of a truth he could never forget: greatness can appear in the most unexpected forms, and talent, courage, and determination often come from places we least expect. On that stage, in that music hall, the roles had reversed, and he was no longer the one in control, at least for this moment. He was simply a witness to something extraordinary. And as the young girl took her final bow, the singer knew, deep down, that this was a performance he would carry with him forever, a lesson in humility, admiration, and the power of believing in oneself. The challenge he had set out to impose had turned into a testament of her resilience and talent, and for the first time that day, he realized that true brilliance could not be mocked, it could only be celebrated. The young girl had just finished her breathtaking solo, yet the music hall remained suspended in a moment of awe, as if time itself wanted to savor what had just happened. Slowly, the audience began to react, a ripple of applause that started softly but quickly grew into a thunderous wave. Cheers, whistles, and claps filled every corner of the room. Parents rose to their feet, their faces alight with pride. Some wiped away tears, moved by the unexpected brilliance of a performance that had started as a challenge. The children in the choir, who had watched in amazement from behind, were almost speechless. Their eyes shone with inspiration, and a few whispered quietly to each other, "She did it, I've never heard anything like that." Even the shyest performers, who had been nervous moments before, seemed emboldened, as if her courage had passed to them, teaching a silent lesson: fear could be faced, and challenges could be turned into triumphs. The famous singer, still standing on stage, clapped slowly, deliberately, letting the young girl's achievements sink in fully. His face, once confident and mocking, now held respect, admiration, and even humility. The audience followed his lead, cheering louder, some calling out her name, creating a chorus of encouragement that seemed to lift her even higher. Cameras flashed, and phones recorded the moment, capturing the raw power of her voice and the overwhelming emotions that filled the room. As the applause continued, whispers began to ripple through the audience, spreading the story of what had just happened. "Did you hear those notes? She made him speechless. She's incredible." The energy in the hall was electric, not just because of the performance, but because of what it represented: courage, resilience, and the triumph of talent over doubt. People who had come expecting a simple rehearsal had witnessed something extraordinary, something unforgettable. Outside the hall, news of her performance spread quickly. Social media buzzed with clips of her solo. Viewers across the city and even beyond marveled at her skill. Comments poured in: "This girl is amazing. She deserved a standing ovation. Talent like this should be celebrated everywhere." The story of the young girl, once singled out to be mocked, was now going viral, inspiring countless people who saw in her a reminder that brilliance can emerge from the most unexpected places. Parents and teachers from other schools shared the clip, praising her dedication and courage. Music professionals called it a once-in-a-generation talent, while ordinary viewers were moved simply by the story of someone overcoming fear. Every message, every comment, every view seemed to reinforce the same truth: the young girl had not only sung notes that were impossible for many to reach, but she had also touched hearts, proving that determination and self-belief could create moments that resonate far beyond a single performance. Even the children in the choir began to see themselves differently, inspired by what they had witnessed. For the first time, some dared to imagine stepping into the spotlight themselves, believing that if she could face fear and exceed expectations, so could they. Teachers and mentors praised the young girl not just for her technical skill, but for her courage, poise, and the example she had set for everyone present. Her story quickly became a symbol of empowerment, showing that talent combined with courage could transform any challenge into a triumph. In the music hall, the energy slowly settled. but the impact lingered. The young girl, still standing in the center of the stage, realized the magnitude of what had just happened. It wasn't just about the applause or the recognition, it was about the ripple effect her courage had created, touching every person in the room and reaching far beyond, into homes, phones, and hearts across the world. She had turned a moment meant for mockery into a celebration of talent, resilience, and hope, and in doing so, she had inspired everyone who witnessed it to believe in the power of determination. And so, the story spread, not just as a performance, but as a message. Greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places, courage can defy expectation, and one person's moment of triumph can ignite inspiration in countless others. The young girl, once nervous and uncertain, had become a beacon, a living example of what happens when talent meets bravery, leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered long after the applause had faded. The echoes of applause had finally faded, but the energy of the moment lingered in the music hall, thick and almost tangible. The young girl, still standing in the center of the stage, felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration wash over her. Her chest heaved with deep breaths, her heart still racing, but now not from fear or nerves. This time it raced from pride, joy, and a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She had faced a challenge designed to intimidate her and had turned it into a moment that would be remembered, not just by the audience, but by herself forever. The famous singer, once so confident and unyielding, approached her with a newfound respect. His expression softened, and for the first time, he spoke words free of mockery. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity. "I've seen many talented performers, but what you just did, it's rare, and it takes courage beyond talent." The young girl felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition she had worked so hard for, not for fame, not for approval, but for the validation of her own effort, her own belief in herself. Outside the music hall, the story had already begun to ripple through social media and news outlets. Clips of her performance went viral, garnering millions of views and comments filled with admiration, inspiration, and awe. People across the world marveled at her talent, but more than that, they were touched by her courage. The narrative was no longer just about a singing performance, it was about overcoming fear, facing mockery, and rising above expectations. A young girl, once singled out to be humiliated, had become a symbol of resilience and empowerment. Teachers, music mentors, and professionals in the industry praised her, calling her performance legendary, unforgettable, and a once-in-a-generation moment. Students who had been in her choir, once nervous about performing themselves, were inspired to practice harder, to believe that they too could achieve greatness if they faced challenges with courage. The ripple effect of her performance was evident everywhere, not just in applause, but in confidence, hope, and the drive to try. Even the famous singer, who had initially attempted to mock her, carried the lesson with him. He realized that true talent was not only about precision and experience, but about heart, courage, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. In that moment, he understood that teaching, guiding, and even challenging others required humility and recognition of the unexpected brilliance that can emerge from anyone. For the young girl herself, the legacy was personal as well as public. She learned that fear is temporary, but courage, once embraced, can change everything, that a single performance, even under pressure, can redefine how people see you and, more importantly, how you see yourself. Every high note she had sung, every moment she had held her ground against intimidation, became a cornerstone of her confidence, shaping her not just as a singer, but as a person who would face the world with determination and grace. Her story quickly became more than just a local legend, it became a symbol of hope, particularly for young performers who had ever been doubted, belittled, or underestimated. Parents, teachers, and mentors began sharing the video as an example of courage and resilience, emphasizing that talent alone is important, but belief in oneself can transform challenges into opportunities. It inspired countless young people to step into the spotlight, embrace fear, and trust their abilities. Even years later, the memory of that performance lived on, not only in recordings but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The young girl's courage, her ability to transform mockery into triumph, became a story parents told their children, teachers told their students, and performers told each other. Her legacy was not just the notes she had sung, it was the inspiration she had sparked, the courage she had ignited, and the proof that no one can diminish brilliance when it is embraced fully. And so, the young girl, once nervous and uncertain, became more than a performer. She became a beacon, a reminder that greatness often emerges in the most unexpected places, that courage and talent together can overcome doubt, and that a single moment of bravery can leave a lasting impression that inspires generations. Her story would echo far beyond the music hall, a legacy of empowerment, resilience, and unforgettable triumph.